roughly about 1,600 years after the creation of Adam. A few hundred years later, mankind had propagated in the earth again, and Yahweh came to this man, Abram, in the land of Ur. And by then, all the people had again become estranged from Yahweh. Doesn't take long. And it's because people decide they want to do their own thing. They don't want to do what he wants. It doesn't take long for people doing that before they really get out of touch with him. And that's what happened, a few generations. And it was like this again. And the people worshiped false gods. And Yahweh started making himself real to Abram in the midst of this situation, and spoke to him and called him out to go to a place that Yahweh would show him, a land that Yahweh would show him. So he was called to leave the only civilization that existed in the world and just to go off into the wilderness following after the voice of Yahweh. How many of us would sign up for that? Yeah, see, most of us probably would sign up for that. Most people, though, probably would not sign up for that. It's too scary. But the truth is, if Yahweh keeps talking to you about something, he has a way to get his point across. And sooner or later, he has his way. So this is what happened with Abram. He followed Yahweh, and we know the end of the story, that he became the friend of the Creator. That's grace. If you want to know what grace is being an idol-worshiping pagan and having God come to you and turn you into his friend. That's what happened with our father, Abram. And we all know about the covenant that God made with Abram, that he would make a great nation out of him, like the stars of the heavens, and that through him, through his seed, all the families of the earth would be blessed. And Yahweh kept right on that track. You know, the world continued to be nuts, like it's been all along. The people who are not in touch with Yahweh continue to be crazy. And we have a world history full of wars and people killing each other and just all kinds of craziness. This is the history of the world. However, the focus of Yahweh just continues forward. He has this plan. He just keeps working this plan. And that's what he did. Eventually, 2 generations after Abram, he raised up Abram's son Jacob, who continued to have this promise. Jacob had his 12 sons. Jacob was renamed Israel. And this is where we get the 12 tribes of Israel, the children of the 12 sons of Israel. This was the beginning of something. Up until this happened, okay, it seemed like the darkness owned the world, not the kingdom of Yahweh. You would look throughout the world, you would not find the kingdom of Yahweh. You would find a tent where you might be received as a guest. That's the kingdom of Yahweh in the world. But now Yahweh put his name on a people. And this nation, well, just a family, started growing into a nation. And we've all heard the story, how after generations, when they became very, very numerous in the land of Egypt, how they became enslaved in Egypt, and how Yahweh lifted up Moses and sent Moses, and using Moses as his instrument, delivered Israel from Egypt with a mighty hand. And he brought the nation before him, before Mount Sinai. And the nation was all gathered there under the mountain. And Yahweh came down onto the top of the mountain. And the mountain shook. And there were great thunders, and there was fire. And the sound of a trumpet blast so loud you could hardly endure it. And all the people were afraid. And Yahweh spoke from the top of the mountain. He spoke to Moses. And he said, basically, I'm going to make a deal with you, with your people. If you will keep my commandments, I will make you a holy nation. I will make you a kingdom of priests. I will make you my special possession. Out of all the nations of the world, you will be my nation. And then he told them what he wanted them to do. And you know what he wanted them to do? He wanted them to do the very things that would bless themselves. They had nothing to give him. What do you have to give him that he doesn't have? All he wanted for them was to bless themselves. He gave them the commandments that we call the 10 Commandments. And what are these commandments for? Except that we might bless ourselves. When we keep these commandments, who is it that's blessed? Who is it that's benefited? Isn't it us? You see, this was him loving us. And saying, look, if you will just do these things that are good for you, then all these good things are going to happen to you, and you're going to be my special people in the world. You will be Israel, my glory. So this was Yahweh's plan for restoring the kingdom. Israel, a special nation out of all the world. Does this mean that Israel is better than every other nation? Well, history tells us otherwise. Israel is not better than all the other nations. But they are chosen because of God's friendship with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see, God honors his relationships. And just because somebody dies doesn't mean the relationship is over. Not to him. And so, these were the ones who benefited from that relationship. Now, you today, who are sitting here, you have benefited from the good things, the righteous things that your forefathers and ancestors did. You do not know them by name, but those faithful forefathers of yours who did righteous things and things in faith before Yahweh, he has not forgotten. And you are blessed because of the things they did. The scriptures tell us that Yahweh blesses those who keep the commandments to 1,000 generations. We long forget those generations, but he doesn't. And this is why he sees you so differently than you see yourself. You are not just an individual floating through this world. You are part of a family tree. And that matters to him. And that's a very big part of your identity and who you are, whatever your family tree may be. And this was true with the nation of Israel? Well, this was 400 years after Abraham that this happened, that Israel was brought out of Egypt. Well, we know the story about Israel, and unfortunately most were not faithful. Most died in the wilderness. They were brought to the very boundary of a blessing, the promised land, and they would not enter in because of their own fear. And many of us are faced with that same choice, aren't we? Very often. We're at the very, very threshold of a blessing. We can enter in or not. So many times people turn away in fear and do not enter in. It's very much a real story that people experience today. But the next generation did enter in, and the remnant of that generation that came out of Egypt, that remnant being only two people, Caleb and Joshua. They entered in at 80 years old. Caleb drove the giants out of the land and took the land of Judah. He himself was a giant. He was a giant of faith. In this world, people get, unfortunately, feeble and weak as they get old. But those men of faith got stronger and more powerful. And that happens with people of faith today. Their body may waste away, but their faith can be powerful. And that's what we see with people like Caleb, people like Moses, 120 years old. He started his ministry at 80. Think about it. Think about the things that he did at 80 years old. And he did not die of any malady. He did not need these things. And it was simply his time. And it's amazing what Yahweh can truly do with someone who is his vessel. Well, moving on, we had a period of time, what we find in the scriptures is called the period of the judges, where the tribes were in Israel, but they were not united under one leader. And everyone pretty much did what they wanted to do, and so they would all sink into disobedience, and that would happen, and then they would come under trouble. They would come under attack by surrounding nations. They would be oppressed, and then they would cry out to Yahweh. He would send them a leader, and they would be delivered, sink back into the same thing again. It just kept happening. Eventually, the people asked for a king, and not just any king, no, a king like the nations. And they prevailed upon Yahweh for a king like the nations. They were not asking for a righteous king of the kingdom of God. They were asking for a kingdom like the nations. So Yahweh gave them a king like a king of the nations. That, of course, was Saul. We know that all turned into a disaster. And then, finally, we get to this time where God chooses a man after his own heart to be the king of his kingdom in this world. So this was about 3,000 years ago that David became king of the whole house of Israel. And David was a man, he made some mistakes, we know about that. But his heart was to do the will of Yahweh in everything. And because